Hello, everyone. On behalf of the expert in international trade at the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal, we welcome you to our webinar of the Desjardins International Meeting Series. So today's topic is the overview of the international financial institutions with a spotlight on the World Bank. My name is Dina Mansour. I am an advisor for international market development at the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal. I am pleased to animate this webinar with you. So our speakers today are Ms. Leah Johnston, Trade Commissioner within the Office of Liaison with the International Financial Institution at the Embassy of Canada in Washington, D.C., as well as Laura Dorling, Advisor at the Office of the Executive Director for Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean at the World Bank Group. I would like to use this time to thank our partners, starting with the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec for its ongoing support of World Trade Center Montreal's activities, as well as our sponsor, Desjardins, who made this webinar series possible. So if you have any questions to our panelists, we invite you to write them in the designated Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen, and we will address them towards the end of the webinar. You may ask your question in the official language of your choosing, and I will be happy to translate in English for you if needed. Alors, veuillez prendre note que ce webinaire est principalement en anglais. Toutefois, si vous avez des questions en français, vous pouvez les poser et il nous fera plaisir de les traduire. You will also receive a short survey that will pop up on your browser at the end, which we invite you to answer to gather your opinion for our future events and your appreciation for this one. I will also send you a follow-up email by the end of the week, which will include the presentation used today that will be available in English as well as in French. Nous allons vous envoyer les diapositives par courriel d'ici la fin de la semaine, qui seront disponibles en anglais ainsi qu'en français. Also, if you'd like to watch this webinar again, we will make the recording available on the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal website, as well as on your YouTube page. So let me start by introducing our first speaker, Leah Johnston. She is a trade commissioner covering the International Financial Institution based at the Embassy of Canada in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the team, Leah was a procurement officer for 8 funded businesses with the Department for International Trade at the British Embassy in Washington. And in this role, she helped UK companies navigate and find success with the World Bank Group, the Inter-American Development Group, USAID, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Her first role at the British Embassy was a business development associate for the life sciences and healthcare sector, promoting both trade and investment expansion to the UK by firms from the Mid-Atlantic. She also graduated from the University of St. Andrews in 2014 with a joint degree in art, history, and international relations. So Leah, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dina. And hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Can you see me?
Yes, we do, Leah.
Okay. So welcome to today's webinar, Spotlight, Overview of the International Financial Institution, Spotlight on the World Bank Group. I'm Leah Johnston. I'm a trade commissioner with the Office of Liaison with the International Financial Institutions. We call ourselves OLIFIs because it's much more manageable. And I'm going to be here to talk to you about the Ifi marketplace as well as the World Bank Group. I'm not seeing the presentation right now. Sorry to delay. I just don't. Does everyone else see the presentation?
I think we do.
Okay.
I'm on the introduction slide, Leah.
Okay, I can't see anything is the problem. I apologize.
It's okay, I'm on the fourth slide with you and Laura.
Is there any way to, okay, I'll just follow off on my phone. So could you go to the slide with the agenda?
Sure, next one. I'm right there.
Okay, thank you. So we'll be starting off today with some introductions about my role, Laura's role, as well as Dina's role, and how we can support you to work with the World Bank Group. We'll also be talking about what is an IFI and how to navigate this sort of complex sector. And then Laura will take over, and she's going to be talking about doing business with the World Bank Group. And then we'll open up to Q&A at the end. So please send in your questions in the Q&A box. Next slide.
You can go.
So what is an Ifi Trade Commissioner? Our role is to help assess your market potential for the IFIs. We can help we help build awareness of the IFIs, and also to really help you understand how to track opportunities, how to understand what the World Bank's doing in, X country that you're interested in. A big part of our role is identifying qualified key contacts within the IFIs. So we typically tend to encourage firms to meet with mid-level bank staff. Sometimes firms want to meet with maybe the VP for Latin America or the global director for energy, which can be useful conversations, but oftentimes the best people to meet with in these institutions are the mid-level practitioners, such as team task leaders who oversee projects, practice managers, specialists. And part of our role is helping you to connect with these people and build relationships. About a little less than half of the World Bank staff is actually based overseas in their country offices. So we're also happy to help connect you to those offices, as well as the implementing agencies that you will be working with on the ground. Another big part of our role is helping to resolve problems. We're very well versed in the World Bank procurement policies, and we keep good relationships with the World Bank procurement team. So if something pops up during the proposal process or later on in the process, just feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help in any way that we can. We also coordinate Canadian participation in key events. We had an incoming mission to Washington last year, a World Bank Business Opportunities Fair that focused on climate smart energy solutions. We also do outreach in Canada. We were in Atlantic Canada in February. And then we also organize sector-specific roundtables and seminars and networking opportunities. Now in this new world that we're in, we're obviously doing much more things virtually. So we're doing webinars, and we're looking at some other virtual networking opportunities that we can put together. One thing to keep in mind is that we are targeted on how successful Canadian companies are with the World Bank and the IDB. So it's really in our interest, and we're motivated to help you through the process. These are kind of the general ways that we help companies, is problem solving, feeding them information, providing contacts, but we work with all different types of companies across many sectors. So every company is a little bit different level of experience. So we're always happy to help. We also disseminate business opportunities to the regional offices, our provincial partners, as well as directly to clients. We don't track every World Bank project, just given that the number of projects that come out by the World Bank and the IDB it's too much for us to track every project, but we do track the majority of the projects, and we try to keep an eye out for ones where we think Canada has world-leading expertise or specialty. So that's kind of the way that Ifi Trade Commissioners can work with you, but if you have other ideas or other needs, just feel free to reach out. Next slide. So the Ifi Trade Commissioners are co-located with the major IFIs. So as Dina mentioned before, I'm in Washington covering the World Bank Group, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the two US agencies for international development, USAID and the Millennium Challenge Corporation. My colleague Tammy Brathwaite is based in Bridgetown, and she's covering the Caribbean Development Bank. Hartman Kouassi is based in Abidjan and Ivory Coast, covering the African Development Bank. Lily Zhu is in Beijing, covering the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And Lulu LeBlanc is in Manila, covering the Asian Development Bank. We also have colleagues in Ottawa, as well as London, who look after the IFIs, including the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the European Investment Bank. So just to say that we have someone there to support you at all of the major IFIs as you start to look at these opportunities and potentially pursue them. Next slide. So now I want to talk about Laura's role in the Office of the Executive Director for Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean. This is a diverse constituency, and it's represented by Louise Livonian, who's the Executive Director. She's also Executive Director of the ED team at the IMF. So she has a unique role where she's double-hatted. And the way that it works is there are 25 board members, or 25 seats on the board at the World Bank. And it's either a single constituency, the US and the UK have one at the World Bank, or multiple constituency, like we have with Ireland and the Caribbean countries. They play a very important role within the World Bank. They provide strategic direction and guidance, and they approve technical and financial support for projects. So all the projects that come through, they will review them. And they sort of act as, they work in consultation with the other executive directors teams. So they are negotiating and sort of forming projects before they would eventually go out to tender. Next slide. Another resource that is available to you is the Private Sector Liaison Officer Network, or PSLO network. This is a network that was started by the World Bank 20 years ago, and it is comprised of business intermediary organizations all over the globe. The World Bank recognized that there's interest from companies all over the globe, and governments are trying to find ways to support their companies. So they created this network. Our PSLO for Quebec is Dina Mansour, who you just heard from. And their role is very similar to our role, and we work together as a team. We facilitate contact with the World Bank teams, as well as disseminate business opportunities. We sort of act as the voice of the private sector to the World Bank, and if we hear certain issues that are coming up over and over again, we can take it to the appropriate team. And then we also host events like the Business Opportunities Seminar last fall. Next slide. So now that I've talked about all the people that you can work with as you start to look at these opportunities, maybe we should back up and talk about what is an IFI. So IFIs provide financial and technical support to developing countries in order to promote economic and social development. Typically, they fund large infrastructure projects, transport, energy, water, etc., because those are typically identified as constraints to growth. But they also work in other sectors such as health and education and other social sectors, as well as on the public administration and governance side. We work with companies across the whole spectrum of the World Bank Group, and we're going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about some of the data of Canadian companies. They operate either globally like the World Bank or regionally like the Inter-American Development Bank, and they oftentimes work together and co-finance projects. So you might see a project that could be co-financed by the World Bank and the IDB or the CDB, etc. Next slide. So the membership consists of the donor countries as well as the borrowing member countries. They also include investment agencies. Some of you might be familiar with the International Finance Corporation, IFC, or IDB Invest. And these are arms that are specifically set up for the private sector. So we'll talk about it a little bit in this presentation, but we are going to be focusing more on the sovereign loans and grants operations side of the bank. Not only are they providing financial support, they're providing technical and advisory support to their client countries, which is something I really try to emphasize when companies are meeting with World Bank staff. Oftentimes the people you're meeting with are technical experts in their field and are looking for new solutions or new ideas to some development issues, or interested in what kind of experience that you can bring to bear to some of their projects. They play a really valuable role in research and development, as well as cooperation on development issues. If you've ever been on the World Bank website or any of the other IFI websites, you'll see they publish a huge amount of information. As I mentioned, there's sort of these development think tanks. Some of them are relevant for the private sector, such as the joint IFI climate finance report that was published last month. And some other ones are more just for your own knowledge awareness that you might need for your sector. Next slide. So the lending typically associated is with well-defined projects with development outcomes and performance indicators. They also increasingly are integrating environmental and social safeguards in their projects, which is great because we have a number of Canadian companies that provide that type of consulting services. Another good thing to keep in mind is that they are increasingly harmonized in their operating procedures as well as their procurement policies. So once you have a good understanding of the World Bank procurement cycle and how IFC works, you should be able to apply a lot of that knowledge to the IDB, the ADB, the CDB, et cetera. So that's a good thing for business. One common misconception that we get is that companies assume they're contracting directly with the World Bank. The majority of the opportunities are through operational procurement, which is done through the borrower country. There are opportunities to contract directly with the World Bank. They're typically on the consulting services side. And we're going to talk about some of the links where the World Bank publishes this information. But just to say the majority of the opportunities are on the operational side, which means the bank is providing the financial and technical support, but the actual contract award and procurement process is run by the implementing agency, such as the Ministry of Transport and Dar es Salaam for a project in Tanzania. Next slide. So why should you bid on IFI projects? Normally we have companies that come to us and they're already interested in the World Bank. They've heard about it or they're looking at developing markets. But for those who aren't sure, we always say that if you're starting to look at some of these developing markets, you'll want to look at the IFIs because it's typically a less risky way to enter them. The projects are following IFI procurement policies that are business friendly, and you're working with World Bank staff, IDB staff, et cetera, to ensure that the projects and all the protocols are followed. There's also the fact that they approve hundreds of projects every year, which result in billions of dollars of business opportunities. So as you start to look in some of these markets, a lot of Canadian companies, when they start looking at the Caribbean, you'll probably run into some World Bank IDB and CDB projects. So it's good for your own awareness to know how the IFIs work. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about some contract award data that we received from the World Bank procurement team. And this is kind of to show you what other Canadian companies are doing at the World Bank, and also to give you some ideas of potential partnering opportunities. We often tell companies, especially ones that haven't worked with the World Bank before, to look for partners, and we can suggest partners as well as our trade commissioner colleagues on the ground in other countries. But this is just to show you that there are Canadian companies that are winning and working across a number of sectors in the World Bank Group. This one shows that the majority of the contract awards are in consulting services. Canada does particularly well in the consulting services sectors, and that's typically because the contracts are more quality-based. On the goods and works, they tend to be more cost-based and can typically be done by local suppliers in the country. Although these are major generalizations, so just something to keep in mind. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about contract awards by sector. So as you can see, Canadian companies work across pretty much every sector that the World Bank works in: health, agriculture, transportation, energy, education, etc. And Canada has a number of world-leading companies in all of these sectors. So just to show that even though some of the bank's portfolios is typically in infrastructure, increasingly they're doing more in the health and education sector because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Laura will talk about that a little bit more later. Next slide. So this slide is the Canadian-based top 10 consulting services providers. And one thing I should have mentioned before, the fiscal year runs June 30th to July 1st. So this data is from a couple months ago. As you might recognize some names on these firms, there might be some new ones in there, but just to show some of the companies that are active in this space. And one thing I should note is that the procurement team can pull the data for the primes, but they're not able to pull the subcontractors. So this is not a full view of all the contracts that Canadian companies have won and all the success that Canadian companies have had. It's just the ones where they've been the prime, and that's just a technical issue on the data side. Next slide. So this is the overall contract distribution by value. As you can see, there's a fairly good spread. A few contracts under 100,000. The majority tend to be in the 100,000 to 500,000, and that's in US dollars range. And then some above that, up to $1 million and $5 million. So I would say that the opportunities really vary because the World Bank works in small island countries as well as large countries like India and Pakistan. So the size of the projects, the size of the contracts really varies, and also really varies from sector to sector. The World Bank has a competitive process for the majority of their opportunities because they're trying to ensure value for money for their clients and keep an open and transparent process. There are some opportunities for sole sourcing, but it tends to be in instances where it could either be in a fragile and conflict state or a company that might have something, technology or product or service that other companies don't have, so they would have to sole source. But in general, it's a competitive process and open to companies from around the world to bid on these contracts. Next slide. So this is where Canadian-based suppliers won contracts for the last fiscal year. The majority of contracts were won in Africa, which is no surprise there. Canadian companies tend to work in French and English-speaking countries. So we particularly do well in West Africa, English and French-speaking Caribbean. But increasingly, we're seeing Canadian companies active in the other regions that the World Bank works in, such as Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and East Asia and the Pacific, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean. We're seeing more companies working in Spanish-speaking countries. Next slide. So this is the top 10 supplier countries. So you'll notice that a lot of the supplier countries also tend to be the borrowers, which is fairly typical. Some of these large infrastructure projects are, they use local suppliers because it's more cost-based or local supplies. So that makes sense, but there are a number of European countries that are also in the top 10. Canada is at 67, which is lower than we were the previous year. But I think that just goes to show that we have a lot of room for improvement, and I think we can move up the supplier list. Next slide. So this is the top 10 consulting services countries. So Canada is in the top 20. I believe the year before we were in the top 10, so it sort of fluctuates. But as I mentioned before, we're particularly competitive in the consulting services sectors, and that tends to be the majority of the companies that we work with as well. So I hope all of this IFI 101 information, as well as some data on some Canadian companies, has been helpful to you. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Laura Dorling. She is an advisor in the Office of the Executive Director for Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean. In her role as an advisor, she maintains board-level responsibilities and helps shape and approve investments in developing countries financed by the World Bank, the IFC, and the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, also known as MIGA. Laura also manages private sector programming and client engagement to promote global markets for procurement and investment opportunities in developing countries, increase flows of private capital to emerging markets, and support the World Bank Group's efforts to maximize financing for development. Laura previously worked on operational teams across multiple geographics, including Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and South Asia, as a senior governance specialist and senior disaster risk specialist at the World Bank. She was also a member of the World Bank's rapid response team deployed to Haiti after the devastating earthquake in 2010. And she was also previously a senior counselor on the board of directors at the Inter-American Development Bank. So I think that you guys will all be in good hands. Laura knows the World Bank inside and out. So I will hand over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Fantastically, and thank you so much for your kind introduction and your excellent presentation. Can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So I'd also like to thank Dana as well as our host today and the entire team at the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal for bringing us together today for this webinar. And I also would like to extend appreciation to Enzo De Laurentiis, who is the World Bank's Chief of Procurement Policy, who always is very supportive of these types of outreach events, and really wanted to thank him and his team for much of the material we have available to share with you today. most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for making the time to join us to learn a little bit more about the World Bank. I think it's really important to recognize that we do know that the current situation in the context of COVID-19 is creating different challenges for all of us, both personally and professionally. And so really wanted to just thank you for making the time for joining us, despite the competing priorities and many things that people are managing these days. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you today, albeit virtually. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. Merci encore pour l'invitation. As Dina had mentioned, we do want to make sure that we have time for questions and answers at the end of this. So, vous pouvez poser des questions en français. On va faire nos mieux à répondre en français ou en anglais at the end of this presentation. So, with that being said, we do have quite a bit of material to cover and not a lot of time. So, let's get started. So first of all, this photo here, some of you may recognize, but this is an image of the World Bank Group headquarters, World Bank headquarters in Washington, D.C. And similar to many of you, we're actually working from home these days. Similar to many of you in Montreal, Quebec, and Canada, we are working from our home-based offices, at least until the end of the year. This is one of the new ways that we are working in this new world. So as Leah had mentioned earlier, we have in the past hosted business opportunities events and have hosted a lot of incoming delegations. We're obviously not doing that at this point in time, but really delighted again to have the opportunity to connect with you in this virtual format. I think this does reflect a new way that we are currently working and will be working for the foreseeable future. So again, with great gratitude for connecting in this new format. But as you can imagine, despite working from home, and I'm sure many of you have found a similar situation, our work program has continued, and if anything has only intensified and amplified in the context of this health and economic crisis that's affecting countries around the world. So first of all, to get started, and here we go. So it's working. I can change the slides. For some of you, I know some of you attending today are very experienced already with World Bank procurement. And for others, I'm assuming because this is a 101 session, this may be your very first time. So what I wanted to do is just give a quick overview of the World Bank Group structure. Actually, there are 5 institutions that constitute the World Bank Group. And we all have a similar mandate across these various institutions, but we have very different ways of working and in fact actually have different types of clients. So to start with, and for purposes of the conversation today, we're really going to be focusing on the World Bank itself. And with that, that's what we refer to in terms of the 2 institutions that we have that have the ability to work directly with governments. We have the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, which is designed to be working with middle-income countries. And we also have the International Development Association, otherwise referred to as IDA, and that's how we're able to provide financing for low-income developing countries. So collectively, we refer to both IBRD and IDA together as the World Bank. For your purposes, it doesn't make as much of a difference. What you need to remember is that that is how we are working with and for client countries. And in that context, that's a really important factor to keep in mind, because that does shape how you would be pursuing and approaching different types of procurement opportunities. Though we also have the ability through the World Bank Group to work directly with the private sector. We have the International Finance Corporation, or IFC, as Leah had mentioned, and that's where we're able to provide both investment and advisory services to encourage more private sector development and investment in developing countries. We also have the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, otherwise referred to as MIGA, and that's where we're able to provide political risk insurance and credit enhancements, again, really to attract more private capital investments in developing countries. And the 5th institution is actually referred to as ICSID, or the International Center for Settlement and Investment Disputes. So that is handled at arm's length, but it is a very important feature to help with international arbitration of investment disputes. So for purposes of today, just to reiterate, we'll be focusing on the World Bank and mainly procurement opportunities to support client countries. So where exactly are these types of business opportunities? I wanted to break this down for you because I think it's a very large organization, as you can tell. In fact, we have 5 separate institutions within one broader group. But ultimately, there are a couple of ways you can work with and through the World Bank Group. One is direct contracting with the World Bank Group directly, and that is through corporate procurement. For consulting services, we have a specific platform for that. Many of you may be familiar with that already. It's called eConsultant 2, where we're able to promote opportunities where we're looking for individuals or firms to provide consulting services with the World Bank as a client directly. It could be the World Bank, also it could be the International Finance Corporation, or it could be the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. They're all promoting the relevant consulting opportunities through that portal. But where the bulk of the opportunities are, as Leah had mentioned, is actually where you could be involved with operational procurement. And this is an ability to participate in projects that are financed by the World Bank that are ultimately supporting our client or borrowing countries. And that's an important distinction because in that case, it would be the client, it would be the country actually as your client. And that would also be the client of the World Bank. So that is where you find procurement related opportunities for goods, works, and non-consulting services, as well as consulting services. And as Leah mentioned, we are quite competitive when it comes down to consulting services. The other way you could work, especially for some of the smaller firms, is you could be engaged through World Bank related projects, but as a subcontractor or partner. And I think that's a really highly recommended way to go for those of you who are newer to this market of the international financial institutions. And the other way, of course, could be as a project sponsor, as an investor, where you would be then working directly with IFC and or MEGA. So I just wanted to highlight, though, it's really important to emphasize that this is a globally competitive environment. So your experience really does matter. And there is actually an investment required to prepare and navigate these types of opportunities. So you really want to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward and really defining the types of opportunities that are most relevant. And we'll have the chance to talk about that a bit later. So just to give you a couple of really quick examples, this is from the eConsultant 2 portal. I did pull it up a few days ago, so we would be prepared for this particular webinar. But this gives you an idea of the types of business opportunities, specifically consulting assignments that are posted. And as you can see there for the selection type, it indicates whether it's an individual or a firm. And this is where they're asking for expressions of interest. You'll see the deadline there happens to be September 21st. It looks like that's only because that's when I was also pulling this up again. That deadline has passed, but if you go to the website below, you'll be able to actually pull up the real-time examples. And you'll see that there's a wide variety of opportunities that come up. There's some for COVID-19 impact assessments, for instance. There's some related to food safety consulting firm that's being sought out. And because this is corporate procurement, this is where you would actually have the World Bank, IFC, or MEGA as your client directly. For some of you, that may be a great starting point. And this is an example of the request for expression of interest, one pertaining to addressing development challenges, for instance, in India's hydropower sector. So of course, we have a lot of hydropower capability in Quebec and across Canada. So wanted to flag this just as a type of example where the World Bank would be hiring a firm directly to help prepare some projects in that particular country in that sector. So I would encourage you to take a look at all of those opportunities. Now, if we step back for a minute, I think it's really important for us to take a look at the scope and the reach of the World Bank. The World Bank, ultimately, we have a set of twin goals, and I think that's really important to highlight here. First off, one of the goals is to end extreme poverty. And secondly, the other twin goal is to promote shared prosperity. So anything and everything that we do is in that context. Now, one of the main tools that we use through the World Bank to support client countries in developing countries is to actually provide countries with investment project financing, as Leah mentioned, where we can provide funding across a variety of sectors to help support their development priorities. So that's what we call IPF, or investment project financing. And it's actually those types of loans that we're providing to governments that then relates to the actual procurement opportunities. So for instance, if you take a look here, we have currently $207 billion of net IPF commitments reflected in more than 1,700 projects worldwide in 142 countries. And again, there's quite a bit of flexibility there as to the type of projects we can support, but the bulk of the activity refers to physical and social infrastructure, really what's necessary to help reduce poverty and create more sustainable development. So if we take a look at what that actually means, with the operations procurement, if we look at the amount of annual spend, for instance, and again, thank you to the World Bank's procurement team for helping to compile this data, what we can see here is that we have over 12 billion US dollars in terms of spend in fiscal year 20. And as Leah mentioned, that for us ended as of June 30th. And as you can imagine, a lot of that's reflected in infrastructure lending. So we have their water, sanitation, waste management, for instance, at 22% of the total spend in fiscal year 20. Transportation at 16%, energy and extractives as well at 16%. We've seen a lot of activity, especially in the area of renewable energy, increasingly in energy storage. So those tend to be very high portions of the overall portfolio for operations procurement. But also importantly, we do commit a lot of financing to help support public administration, governance reforms, and the like. And as you can see, everything from agriculture to social protection. Now, what's interesting here is the fact that we have only 6% reflected for health. And I think it's very much expected. And what is obvious is, as you can imagine, we will see a pretty significant shift in our portfolio and actual spend in our current year, fiscal year 21, as a result of what we're seeing for COVID-19. So just to put that in context, the World Bank Group has had quite a substantive operational response to COVID-19. I'm pleased to report that we were able to respond very quickly. And in fact, the board had approved a new fast-track facility specifically for COVID-19, and it has allowed the institution to respond faster and I would say better in terms of this emergency context than what we've ever seen in the past, given the scale of this health and economic crisis. So there are now more than 100 projects in 100+ countries that have been approved. And for those of you involved in any way with COVID-19 preparedness or response, I would encourage you to take a look at these specific projects. And I've included there for you the link to specific countries and the type of work that's being done. Up until now, we have had most of our efforts focused on the actual health response, everything from helping countries to have access to personal protective equipment, to ventilators, to really building up their health care systems to be able to strengthen their ability to be better prepared and respond accordingly. And as a recent update from our Chief Operating Officer of the World Bank Group, he had confirmed that the World Bank is currently providing the largest global response in a developing country context to help client countries, again, combat COVID-19. And also President Malpass has announced that we will be looking at even greater response in terms of economic recovery, and we are expecting to have a significant amount of funding going into countries in the very near term. The President Malpass had indicated a 15-month timeline. We're a few months into that, so within the next year, he had announced we are aiming to get to up to $160 billion in lending. So as mentioned, unprecedented and busier than ever given the current urgency pertaining to the COVID response and the high demand for further support for client countries. So if we take a look at where we operate already, no surprise here, as Leah had mentioned, a lot of activity, about 30%. This goes back to actually fiscal year 2019, but a lot of activity in sub-Saharan Africa, certainly very active in many parts of Asia as well, and as well as Latin America and the Caribbean. And no surprise, you've seen Canadian suppliers active in pretty much all regions. So again, just to emphasize, why is it important to actually bid on bank-funded contracts? Well, one, as you've heard from Leah, there are actually billions of dollars worth of business opportunities. These opportunities do present new ways to be working globally, and they also present opportunities to enter developing markets. Really important factor is actually the fact that there's equal opportunity and fair treatment through World Bank and IFI funded contracts, in the sense that there are set standards of integrity and certainty of processes. There's also higher certainty of payment, just given the fact that there is bank financing already available once approved to be able to support the tenders that you would be bidding on. And also really importantly is the fact that there are a variety of contract sizes, which makes it accessible to some of the largest firms that are able to deliver on large-scale infrastructure projects, but we actually see a lot of activity with small and medium-sized enterprises. So I think that does create a lot of window of opportunity depending on your areas of specialization. So if we take a look at our actual procurement vision, I think it's really important to highlight a few of these points, because the way that the World Bank sees this is that procurement in investment project financing should support borrowers to achieve value for money with integrity in delivering sustainable development. Again, at the end of the day, procurement is one tool that's being utilized to, again, achieve those twin goals. We're really focused on sustainable development. And it's important to note that we are helping countries have better value for money. Also, fit for purpose, we're looking for efficiency, and of course, integrity and transparency are important features of the overall procurement process at the World Bank. So one way that we do that is that there's an actual established set of procurement regulations that are available for borrowers. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at this yet, I would encourage you to give it a read. It does explain everything that we can do in terms of goods, works, non-consulting and consulting services. For those of you who have done work with the World Bank for some time, we used to have a red book and a green book. This is now compiled into one set of regulations actually for the borrowers to make it more streamlined. So that's just one way that we do try to bring some standardization to the overall process to make it easier for suppliers like yourself to participate. So the other important feature is that we actually do have a new procurement framework. And I'm not going to touch on all these details, but just to let you know that thanks to the consultation that we had in Montreal by your hosts today a few years back, we have actually taken into account that feedback, and we do have a new procurement framework. I say it's new, but it was officially approved in 2016. And it's new because it is being applied to all new investment project financing. But the idea is that it should be now more fit for purpose, and we should be looking a lot more at both quality and price as we go forward, again, depending on the specific tender. So this is just one slide. I do want to make sure we have just a couple of minutes here, but for the World Bank project cycle, ultimately we define projects in two categories. We have the project pipeline, which to us mainly means project preparation, and we also have project approval and implementation. So when we're taking a look at this, the project pipeline, as you can see here, it's outlined in 4 stages, from identification, preparation, appraisal, and then ultimately for negotiation and bank approval. That's where all of the preparatory work comes into play. So there are several short-term consulting opportunities that can come up during this project pipeline preparation stage. And that's where we start the first set with the country strategy, the country partnership framework. We go through with the project information document, we get to a project appraisal document, and we actually have a specific procurement plan. So if you're not currently tracking the procurement plans, I would suggest you do so, because it will tell you up front, even at early stages of project preparation, what we're expecting to see come out in terms of tenders. And all of that information is available publicly, and we'll share the links with you at the end of this presentation. And then once it's actually approved, the project then goes into the implementation stage. And again, depending on the size of the project, it may actually be that these projects could take several years to implement. So just because the project has been approved, that actually is usually the trigger point as to when we would see the bulk of the related procurement opportunities coming up on World Bank operations procurement. So here are just a few tips for you, and I do want to make sure we have that time for questions and answers. Again, the material will be shared with you, but it's really important for you to understand the international financial institutions and really at the core, the country partnership frameworks. You know, what those development objectives are and where the World Bank in this instance would find its comparative advantage to support those countries and provide financing, which then leads to procurement opportunities through that project cycle we've just talked about. you know, it's really important to get involved early and be patient and keep a longer term view. And also it's highly recommended to consider local partners to increase your chances of winning. And in fact, many of the successful Canadian suppliers do that, which is why it's not fully captured in the procurement statistics that Leah had mentioned. So here are a few more tips for you to take home with you, but just it is important to establish regular contact. These days, of course, that means virtual meetings and calls, but to try to stay top of mind and really make sure that you are understanding the scope of opportunities. And just to highlight anything of this presentation, I wanted to leave you with this slide referring to our business guide. There's actually procurement guidance on finding business opportunities and winning contracts financed by the World Bank. There is a link there that will take you to this publication, and wanted to make sure that you can take this with you. So just to let you know, there will be some additional slides here that you will have in the presentation with specific links that will take you to all of the core documents as to where you can identify contractual opportunities and start to track relevant opportunities for your firms. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to Dina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura and Leah as well. Also, as a private sector liaison officer for the region of Quebec, I'd like to share with you some opportunities within the World Bank Group and international financial institution that I receive from time to time from Laura and Leah's offices. So if you're interested for me to contact you whenever I receive these opportunities, please let me know by answering the current poll in progress so I can have your contact. So it's now time for the questions period. I invite everyone to write down your questions in the Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen. So we'll start with a very first question we received from Edner Previlon. This question is for Laura. So Laura, how can we explain the disbursement procedure of the World Bank?
Sure. So in terms of the disbursements, that's actually a term that we refer to as to how we're providing the funding to client countries. So it does actually depend on the type of lending mechanism. Today, we focus primarily on the investment project financing, but there are other types of lending mechanisms we have. They just don't necessarily translate to procurement opportunities like development, financing. We have policy-based lending, et cetera. So each of those types of lending would have a different type of disbursement schedule. And a lot of that can be shaped to the type of project. So for instance, if it's a large scale infrastructure project, for instance, it could be wrapped around certain key deliverables and stages of those projects. So that is something that's very specific to the type of lending and to what those client country needs are. And happy to discuss further offline if you'd like more details.
Thank you. The next question is, in a public call for tenders, what does the World Bank prioritize from a bidder, and what are the technical proposal or financial proposals? And I think this question is, maybe Leah, can you answer this question?
Sure. So I would say it depends on the procurement opportunity. Some are more cost-based, and some of them are more quality and technical scores based. The weight differs from each opportunity. So it's included in the terms of reference what the weighting will be if it's 70-30, 60-40, whatever, 80-20. We're seeing more of those favoring technical lately. But it's hard to say it's always this because it really depends on each scenario. And Laura, I don't know if you want to add anything on or.
Sure. Yeah, I think one important feature of the new procurement framework is that in some of the instances, particularly when it was a selection method calling for the least cost bid, where cost would be the only factor, in many instances, we'll see more quality and cost considerations. The idea being that client countries also didn't want to be in a position to have to go with the only, the lowest cost, if that maybe didn't take into account the whole project life cycle costing or some maintenance factors. So that is a newer component I think we'll see more of in the context of the new procurement framework.
Thank you. Our next question is in French, so I will read it in French, but I'll also translate it in English. It's from Henri Paul Bronsard. His question is French, is Pour quelles raisons avez-vous créé un tribunal au-dessus ou en parallèle des juridictions des systèmes judiciaires des pays concernés? So in English would be, why did you create a tribunal below or in parallel with the courts of the judicial systems of the countries concerned?
A very good question. I think I can take that, Leah, and I guess that's referring specifically back to that fifth institution I mentioned, ICSID. So the reason really, I believe, is that we wanted to make sure that there is really an independent type of international arbitration that is agreed to and supported by all of the member countries. So I should mention that as Leah mentioned earlier, in terms of the governance of the World Bank Group, we do have 25 executive directors, but we have 189 member countries, for instance. So there is full membership by many countries. Now, it's important to have a credible internationally accepted, accredited type of arbitrator to help resolve these disputes. And in many cases, if it is between a sovereign country and an investor in that market, you do want to have someone who is able to credibly look at these issues for all parties involved. Merci.
The next question will be towards Leah. It's from Drew Knight, and his question is, what role do you see for university researchers in IFI bids?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think there's a number of consulting opportunities. I guess my question would be, is it more knowledge sharing or is it more interested in bidding on some opportunities? Because there are a number of consulting opportunities either on the corporate or the operational side. In the educational sphere, and we can send you the links to kind of track them. And one thing that I was going to mention is we do have the World Bank has a new procurement alert service where you can sign up to receive messages about projects that you're following, and it's free and open to anyone sign up. So that's a good way to track it. So I don't know if that answered it, but I would say it depends on what avenue you're going, if it's more of a knowledge sharing one or if it's more of pursuing contracts. Laura, I don't know if you have any other.
I also think Drew also mentioned that he's looking towards short-term consultants.
Okay, I think the number of short-term consulting opportunities are typically on eConsult, which is the corporate procurement side that Laura showed on her PowerPoint. And there are opportunities in all of the World Bank member countries across all sectors. So it does take some time to kind of go through things and understand how the World Bank puts out information, how to register on their systems. But once you have that, you can very easily sort through information.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that as well, you're right. The short-term consultancy opportunities, they are posted through the eConsultant too. As you can imagine, there are a lot of people tracking those. So if you have a particular area of expertise in a particular sector, particularly if you bring in language capabilities, if you're bringing in French and English, for instance, there's also an opportunity to engage directly with some of the teams. So for some of those who are involved on the knowledge agenda, as Leah mentioned, the research end, if there are specific areas of expertise, you may want to connect in with the teams to just compare notes as to what you're looking at for your research and what the World Bank is looking at. And just to flag, we do have a very large open data portal where we are disclosing all of the development related indicators and a lot of different types of tools that many researchers use. So it's also open to provide feedback. If you're doing research that could further expand on that type of data, that's always appreciated as well.
Thank you. So the next question will be for Laura from Kristen Goodin. And the question is, what is the World Bank doing to secure digital communication and banking transaction between connection sources?
Okay, so let me break that down. So excellent question. And it's actually quite interesting because digital infrastructure has really been prioritized in the agenda in recent years. What we've realized is as much effort as was put in for hard infrastructure, as Leah mentioned, energy, transport, we really need to be helping countries close this digital divide and help build out their digital infrastructure. So there has been quite a concerted effort there, particularly in many African countries where the World Bank's Vice President for Infrastructure is really advocating for increased commitments to digital infrastructure investments, especially in the African continent. Obviously now in the context of COVID, we're also seeing the real need to be able to do that, the impacts that this has or potential for educational opportunities, virtual learning, healthcare systems. So we'll expect that going forward. On the banking side, the bank is also very involved. We basically tend to work with platforms that are already tried and proven, and we can be useful in terms of helping to scale in certain applications. So I will leave it there. I will say we have an excellent Chief Information Officer of the World Bank Group, who is Vice President, who happens to be Québécois, en fait, Denis Robitaille. He's doing an excellent job, and he's specifically looking at bringing new ways of bringing in innovative technology to have more development impact through his team and across the World Bank Group.
Thank you. The next question is in French from Henri Tichou, and it's also concerning the World Bank, so for Laura. I'll read it in French and then translate it for everyone else. Alors, quels sont les dispositifs que la Banque mondiale donne aux entreprises qui voudraient travailler sur un projet pour couvrir les frais liés à la sécurité et au coronavirus? So in English, what tools does the World Bank provide to companies that would like to work on a project that will allow them to cover the costs related to security and COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. This is something that is really important to clarify through that bidding process. One of the slides with the tips you'll see is just to seek clarification. You know, before submissions, you want to be clarifying the scope for things like security costs. We are seeing increased activity where we'd like to be doing more, including in fragile and conflict states. Obviously, there are some extra cost implications there. So those are the types of details you really want to be covering off with each individual case. Of course, it is country by country, and even within countries, maybe in some parts it's much safer to be working than other parts, so there could be heightened security concerns or costs involved. It is something that I think largely a lot of the private sector is integrating those costs into their overall proposals, and you want to be clear about what that is, and that is where some of those competitive pressures come in. So you also want to be benchmarking with others as to how they're accounting for those costs. I hope that helps.
Thank you. So our last question from Mathieu Cousineau de Gary. He's asking if you receive referrals from the Canadian Commercial Corporation.
Yes, we do. I don't know, Leah, did you want to go first?
Yeah. I was just going to say we do, and we have spoken to CCC. Actually, well, I was going to say recently, but actually I think it was back in June. Mm-hmm. We do receive some, but I would say it's not a huge portion of our work. Laura, I don't know if you want to expand upon that.
Yeah, we have over the years, we have actually had some, although several years ago now, some direct engagement, mainly through the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, where there was a project that was done with the Canadian Commercial Corporation in Ghana, I believe. There's probably scope to do more there, depending on what the specific project interests are. And one thing worth flagging, though, is, as mentioned, that the World Bank, on the procurement end, we really are committed to having a very robust, open, globally competitive tender system, mainly because we want to make sure that Canadian firms also have the opportunity to bid. But that does mean that we can't necessarily then bring forward a set forth project to the bank for financing with a particular bilateral partner. But there are ways that I think we can engage going forward. So happy to do so if there are specific areas of interest.
Thank you. And maybe one very last question that we just received from Raphaël Lucasso. His question is in French, so I'll read it in French first. So in French is, quel est le délai approximatif entre la soumission d'un projet et l'approbation du projet en général? So I'll translate this question, and it's towards Laura. What are the average delays between when you submit a project and once it's approved in general?
So I would say there's a lot of variation there, to be honest, depending on the complexity of the project. If it's a straightforward, small-scale consultancy, you know, I do find teams are able to turn that around a little bit more quickly. The other important factor there is really also the capacity of the executing agency. So if it is on a World Bank finance project, depending not only which country, but also which executing agency within that country, you know, I do find that some are able to work faster than others. And if you do find there are any sort of extensive delays, which have occurred in the past, then I think even Leah and her office has been able to help play a really useful role to help clarify as to what stage of the process it is. I would say in the context of the current health COVID-19 situation, there are also extenuating delays in some instances. Some places are still moving quickly. Others, as you can imagine, are also dealing with health impact on their staff or people within the government as well. So that can also slow down decision-making timeline. So it is really, there's no set timeline per se. It does depend on the complexity of the projects and the capacity, I'd say, on the ground. Anything else to add to that, Leah?
No, I think you explained it well. It really does vary quite a bit. If it's an IDA country with maybe lower capacity, then it might be a little bit slower. If it's a IBRD country, it might be a little bit faster, but it's hard to make generalizations because it really depends case by case. But just to echo what Laura said, if you are having issues or if you can't get in touch with someone or something like that pops up, just feel free to email us and we can always double check that that's the right person you should be in touch with, or reach out to them as well and just seek clarification. We're always happy to do that.
Well, thank you again, Leah and Laura, for your excellent presentation and discussion. So we're now at the end of the questions period. Also, I wanted to tell everyone, so this is the first webinar we're doing about international financial institution, but we're planning to do a lot more over the next months. So the next one will be planned to be on November 18, and we'll be doing some more every month, and we'll try to cover the different multilateral banks and ways to deal with IFIs. So as a reminder, I will send everyone the slides by email by the end of the week. They will be available in English as well as in French. Alors, pour tous les francophones, nous allons vous envoyer aussi les diapositives en français d'ici la fin de la semaine. So once again, I invite everyone to please complete the survey that will be sent to you or that will pop up on your screen when you leave. It will be extremely appreciated. We will also make this video recording available on our website within the end of the week as well, and on our YouTube channel. Also, the next Rencontre Internationale Desjardins will be in 2 weeks at the same time, and this time we will receive the World Trade Center Savannah, so we can discover opportunities in doing business in the state of Georgia, United States. So it was a pleasure having you here today. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Leah. And thanks to all to the participants for joining us today and engaging in the question period. So on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal, I wish everyone a good day and hope to see you in our next event.
Thank you so much, Dina, and thank you all for joining the webinar.
Thanks to everyone. Merci beaucoup, Dina, et tout le monde.
Merci. Au revoir.